So how do you add a little bit of interest and excitement to a scene that is looking fairly plain light-wise? And in this case, I'm visiting a beach where it was a bit overcast and just a sort of a general middle value light everywhere. It can be a little bit intimidating in figuring out what to paint. So a good idea is to see if there's any clouds. Are there any cloud shadows? Maybe you can even make them up. But in this case, some clouds did come over and there was a break through those clouds, creating some light in the distance and cloud shadow in the foreground. So using gouache paint, I'm going to illustrate how this can make a scene look a little more interesting and exciting and get you motivated to paint it. Here's the scene, and you can see the cloud shadow covering most of the foreground. So I'm using pretty much a standard palette of colors here, just a sky blue, which is next to the cerulean. Some cold pressed paper for a little bit of texture. It's actually Fabriano paper, a little booklet that I carry around and makes a handy sketchbook as well. So I'm going to start off with the darkest dark, and that is pretty much the shadow area, and just go ahead and cover the whole paper with an underpainting. And there's no real particular choice of color, except I think a violet range of colors might make a nice contrast with the light that's going to come through. And it's already starting to suggest where the dunes are going to go in the background. So you can pretty much see a landscape already emerging, and using a bit of tissue to lift some of the overly wet areas, it will dry a bit quicker and I'll be able to get to painting. So the sky area is a relatively small part of the scene, and I'm going to just basically get that out of the way. Our thing with gouache paint, if you've been using it, you'll probably know, or maybe it was a bit of frustration for you, is that not only does it dry very quickly, the main problem is it dries quite a lot darker than the paint is when it's wet. So here I'm putting in a fairly light sky, and as it settles and starts to darken, I'll have to come back in and adjust to make it lighter. So this is, I guess for me, the real trick with gouache paint is it's about layering colors, but also working from dark to light. And you may find that your light gets a little darker as it dries, and therefore you'll come back in and want to make it lighter. It's not really a problem as long as you're just aware of this and don't take your first layer of color as the final color. Here, this shadow area is going in as sort of a violet gray. And I'll only assess it again once it's had a bit of a chance to dry down. And while the colors in the scene are fairly gray on the beach sand, I'm not sure that I want it to be a sort of a grayish ochre. So let's get the sea colors in now, which is simply, for me, adjusting the values to a lighter. I'm going to try to bring quite a bit more color into it as we go, but I'm just painting over the underpainting and getting a block in started. So it's a light blue with a touch of violet in there as well. Using a small number of colors in my limited palette does help to create colors that are more harmonious. Everything's mixed from just a few primary colors. Alright, so we're getting the sense now of the sea and the foreground shadow. Now let's make those colors stand out and get in the lights. And we have a beautiful bit of sunlight breaking through and hitting the dunes back there. So I'm using yellow ochre and titanium white. And you can have a slight little drop of yellow in there as well, just to add some extra warmth. And I'm going to just make the sand a little cooler at the far distance on the left to try to create a little bit of sense of depth and from foreground to background. Bring those lights forward just a little, and then we've got the houses showing up at the top of the dunes there. And I'm putting that color in fairly thin, just soft blues and violets, but it's going to dry quite a bit darker and merge a little with the background that's already there. And that's another feature of gouache, is that it does reactivate when you go over it with any sort of water. So a little bit of those underpainting colors are going to seep through into this fresh paint I'm putting down. So just to illustrate that point I made earlier, I'm going back into that sky, and you can see how it's already settling. And now the complete blocking in is done, and I start adding the lighter colors where I want light color. So you can see how the beach has dried really dark, and I want a bit more sparkle to that. Using a bit more magenta now, and it looks quite pink, but as I've been saying, it will settle a bit. I find sort of a pinkish ochre to be a very nice color, suggestive of wet sand. Lighter blue and slight touch of ochre perhaps into it as well, and that will add some sparkle. Obviously the sky is reflecting into this foreground water, so I'm bringing in a bit of ochre and to pick up that dune. There's the blues, there's the violets as well, everything bouncing around and reflecting to create that sort of wet water mirror effect. Some highlights along the top of the beach area and suggesting the waves and receding water. I've added a few broken areas to create a bit of reflections on the water, and then scumbling in fresh paint over those dunes to get those lights back. Much cooler on the far left there, there's a touch of blue into it. So there we've got the dunes more or less done, and I'm adding a bit of sparkle, extra bit of color to the wet sand area where the shadow has fallen across the beach. And if you look and see, you can see how that sky has dried down and I've decided to get my big brush, the 1-inch brush, and just get a bit more action going up there, a bit more vigor to the sky scene. And a big brush just helps to get rid of all the little shapes that are starting to annoy you. Get rid of that. Bring a bit of life and drama to that sky. And now I'm going to add a couple of figures walking on the beach to add a bit of life and scale to the scene. Of course, there are people walking on the beach all the time and in the reference photo, so it's a good idea to try to add that. I do think it brings a little extra to the scene, just a dash of light as well, hitting the figures. So that's it. I think the light effect has been achieved. I'll add a few little dark accents here or there. And when the light effect is there, it's time to stop. But a little dash of red is nice. Now let's get the tape off, have a look at the final painting, and I think mission accomplished. Nice little scene. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little demonstration, and I enjoyed painting it because reminding yourself to use phenomena like cloud shadows can actually transform any landscape, whether you're in the countryside or on the beach. Distant hills as well. Look out for cloud shadows next time you're looking for something interesting in the landscape. Now, if you want to look into gouache painting a bit more, I've got gouache painting for beginners and an advanced course on gouache painting as well. Have a look in my painting school and see if there's a fit for you. Also, remember to get your subscription to the Create Art magazine. You'll find that below, and it's a free subscription, a great magazine for artists and any creative people looking for some inspiration. And finally, subscribe to this channel. You'll find a bit more coming up in the weeks ahead as well. Until then, happy painting and cheers for now.